welcome to another session of Between Sets. I'm your host, Coach John, and today we're diving into the topic of starting over. I'm going to share my insights and personal stories, but stay tuned to the end because I'm going to share my top 3 pieces of advice for anyone finding themselves in a position to have to start over in life. Starting over can be one of the hardest things a person has to do. I can't speak for everybody, but from my experience, starting over usually occurs when I'm at the end of my rope. Now that can look different for everyone. For some, you've reached the end of the line with the person you're currently with, or maybe even the person you currently are. It could be the place you live, the job you have, the relationship you're in. It could be your physical health. It could be your mental state. We can go on and on and on. Whatever the line is, we've all been at the end of it at some point in life and found ourselves having to start over. Sometimes you reach that point through your own volition, and sometimes you're forced into it. A great example of that for me would be when I had a roommate. I met my roommate on Craigslist. Now that was back when it was still dangerous, but socially acceptable to do so. I can't think of another situation that worked out so smoothly. At this point in my life, I've been a personal trainer for 3 years. I don't have any money. My credit is trash. Big trash, all capital letters, trash. I go to see this apartment after work one night, and before I even got back home, the guy that would eventually become my roommate had offered me the room. We would split utilities. I pay him the rent on the first of the month. Pretty standard. Here's the catch. I'm not on the lease. It's under his name. I'm just renting a room. Now, for those of you wondering why I would take such a deal, you're not paying attention. I had trash credit. No lease meant no credit check. It was a risk I was willing to take, given my situation. So the funny thing is, we got along really, really well for 2 people that didn't know each other prior to living together. We coordinated our morning routines, so we didn't get in each other's way, bought our own groceries, cooked our own food, came up with a cleaning schedule, and dare I say, we even became friends. We lived together for about 5 years, having only gotten into one argument, and since the statute of limitations is up, I can admit I started it, and it was basically for the sake of my own entertainment. But then the pandemic happened, and he, like many, many other people, wasn't doing so well with it, right? He really struggled. One day, my roommate made the decision that he was going to break the lease because he needed to get out. He wanted to move closer to his family in either Detroit or LA. So, okay, imagine this. It's Tuesday night. You watch the Giants play on Monday Night Football. Your roommate comes out of their room, and you're thinking the 2 of you are going to talk about how poorly the Giants played on Monday. Instead, your roommate tells you he's leaving, which also means you have to leave too. Up until now, most every decision that was made was in tandem. Not this time. And I'm scared now because I've been in the same place for so long. It's 15 minutes away from the gym I worked at. We got along really well. I have no place to go, no real money saved, and very bad credit. So at this point, I'm being forced to start over. So my brain starts working, and I convinced my roommate to sublet his room for the summer while he went out to visit his family and figure out what his next steps were going to be. I immediately go on YouTube and I'm searching ways to fix my credit. I call my brother and I'm like, help me. Help me. I need to figure this thing out. I don't really know where to start. Give me some advice. And he did. And he was super helpful, pivotal in this part of my life. I decided I was going to take the next 3 months of the summer to save money, fix my credit, and not only move out, but the next apartment I get, I will live on my own. Now, to make a long story short, I accomplished all the things I said I was going to do. And even though he did me dirty, I'm still friends with my former roommate to this day. Now, your starting over journey might not be the same as mine. But no matter what journey you're on, the very idea of starting over is usually attached with an overall feeling of being overwhelmed. For some, that shows itself as anxiety, depression, fear, maybe even laziness, or even rebellion. Because no matter who you are, how old you are, or how many times you've had to do it, starting over is hard. Sometimes even figuring out where to start can be a whole journey in and of itself. Now, that's not to say you can't find joy in starting over. I think one of the biggest social misconceptions is that starting over should feel terrible. And that simply isn't true. One of the most beautiful things about life is perspective. Say you have a couple in a marriage, and that couple has 2 children. If they ever decided to get a divorce, one person might see everything that they're losing: the family unit, their routine, security, their partner, even their life as they currently know it. The other person might see the positivity in getting to know themselves again, living in a new place, the prospect of meeting new people and building new habits. There's something to be said for the fresh start effect. You know, the feeling of wiping the slate clean and having a clear delineation of the old you from the new you. Some people are excited by the process of finding out what's beyond the horizon. Whether you find yourself having to start over in your fitness journey or in another part of your life journey, or you feel like maybe a reset's coming, here are 3 steps that you could take ahead of time to stay ahead of your situation. Step 1, have a bare minimum health plan. I'm not saying barely have a plan. I'm saying come up with a day-to-day bare minimum, something that you're capable of doing when you feel like you're at your all-time low. For some of my clients, it would look something like take 1,000 steps today. Drink 1 glass of water. Eat twice today. But make sure one of those is an actual meal, even if you don't finish it. Sounds simple enough, right? When you're faced with starting over and anxiety or depression starts to kick in, one of the first things to go is usually a person's personal health. Having a bare minimum plan will allow you to still do something good for yourself, even when you just don't have it in you to keep up with your normal routine. Number 2, do quarterly life evaluations. Remember, these are steps to stay ahead of the game. Figure out the parts of your life that are important to you and know that this is subject to change as you get older and more of your life starts to unfold. Just don't look to try to figure everything out on a day-to-day basis. 3 months is a sufficient amount of time to gauge progress in almost anything that you're doing. Evaluating your life quarterly gives you a chance to get in front of things before they happen, hopefully mitigating how often you find yourself needing to start over. Oh, number 3, keep a record of your past wins because you're going to need them. One of the reasons the idea of starting over is so daunting is because self-doubt usually begins to creep in. Being able to draw off your past experiences and times when you've overcome, dominated, or won are severely underused resources for giving you the confidence boost you need when you're faced with starting over. If you really, really can't find one, remember this. Just 4 years ago, in 2020, the entire world shut down. The economy was doing terrible. People lost their houses, their jobs, family members, and loved ones. There was no sign of what was going to happen next, and there was no guarantee that we would ever get back to how things used to be. You couldn't even read people's facial expressions because masks were hiding everyone's faces. People were terrified to physically embrace each other because of the potential consequences. There were protests, riots, elections, and nasal swabs. We had no idea what to believe or who to listen to. These were the scariest times that I personally lived through. And depending on how old you are, maybe it was the scariest times you lived through too. And here we are, 4 years later, and we survived that. You survived that. You're more resilient than you might be giving yourself credit for. Now, here's what I promised you guys earlier. If you find yourself in a space where you have to start over, here's my 3 pieces of advice. Number 1, give yourself the opportunity to acknowledge how you're feeling. If you're anxious, that's okay. If you're scared, that's okay. If the thought of starting over makes you sad, that's okay too. Allow yourself to acknowledge those feelings because too often we try to ignore them. When you give yourself permission to feel those feelings, you can skip the denial stage and begin to immediately work through them. Number 2, seek guidance. Don't fall into the trap of pretending like you have it all together just to keep up an appearance. I was told by a client one time that he didn't want his child to see him struggle because he didn't want him to see his dad as weak. He wanted to make sure that every time his child looked at him, he was seen as a superhero. And I was a bit younger at the time, and I have 0 experience with raising kids. But I did have the wherewithal to tell him this. I believe as a parent, it's way more heroic for you to prepare your children for life and not protect them from it. I don't think it's important for your kids to believe you have all the answers. But it's crucial to show them that you don't always have all the answers. And sometimes they won't either. And that's okay. Because we have resources out there that can give you a roadmap to make sure you get to where you're headed. And helping them understand what those resources look like, how to utilize them, and that there's no shame in utilizing them. That is important. That is heroic. And lastly, be brave. Now, I know this is typically the part where I'm supposed to tell you to be fearless, but I don't want to insult you like that. Just be brave. Bravery is the ability to get things done in the face of fear and not in the absence of it. Well, that's the end of our session. Great job today. Remember, I'll see you next Wednesday at the same time. All right? Have a great rest of your week. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with someone you care about. If you want to join a community of gym goers that talk about life outside the gym walls, subscribe to Between Sets on YouTube and listen to Between Sets podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.